Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick. It's Tuesday, time to talk about some new releases coming out this Friday, September 27th. There's a little over 500 albums coming out this week. I got 14 on my list for today. There's a bunch of links down below. You got links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist that I put together every week, and the Patreon page. So make sure you check all that out. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button down below, and make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. Like I said in the intro, there's a little over 500 albums coming out this week. Only going to talk about 14 on the show, though, today, so if there's something I don't talk about, make sure you drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you're looking forward to grabbing. And like always, if you're unable to find these in your local brick and mortar stores, they should all be available online. I'll put links down below in the comment section. You can also always go over to the Vinyl Den Amazon store. Well, I've got all the new pre-orders on there. I've got new releases on there. Got some vinyl accessories, all sorts of interesting stuff to check out on there. So the big release for me this week is this reissue of Black Gives Way to Blue by Alice in Chains. Released back in 2009, it was their fourth studio album. It's a 2 LP release. It's going to run you about $33 online. This was Alice in Chains' first album with William Duvall on vocals, replacing legendary Lane Staley, which, I grew up a big Alice in Chains fan. Alice in Chains, at least the way I looked at this album when it was released was, Alice in Chains wasn't Alice in Chains without Lane Staley. So it took me a long time to listen to this album. It's probably within the last, I'd say, maybe 6 or 7 years, I finally got around to listen to it. And I was really impressed with it. Is it as good as, the stuff with Lane, Facelift and all those great albums? No, but I think it's a lot better than what I was expecting it to be. It hit number 5 on the Billboard 200, sold a bunch of copies. I don't have a copy of it on vinyl, so I will grab a copy of that this week. Then you got the reissue of Sing the Sorrow by AFI coming out. Released back in 2003, it was their 6th studio album. It's a 2 LP release, 45 RPM. It's also going to run you about $33 online. This was AFI's big breakthrough album. It also hit number 5 in the Billboard 200. This is an album that was co-produced by Butch Vig, who of course did Nirvana's Nevermind, and the legendary Jerry Finn, who was involved in pretty much all of the highest selling punk albums of the 90s and early 2000s. That's an album that, it was the album, like I said, it was the album that really kind of put AFI in the mainstream. But this one has been out of print for a really long time. It was pressed on vinyl back in 2003 when it was released. And then it wasn't available on vinyl until it was reissued twice last year. Both of them were like limited colored runs. This one's going to be on black vinyl this week. It's another one I don't have on vinyl. $33. I might grab a copy of it this week. There's also a reissue of Vivid by Living Colour coming out this week, released back in 1988. It was their debut studio album. It's going to be on black vinyl. It's going to run you about $24 online. I'm surprised it's already getting reissued. I mean, it is a great album, but Music on Vinyl just did a reissue of on black vinyl earlier this year. Music on Vinyl does really great releases. They did a limited run of it back in, I think it was 2020. It was limited like 1,000 or 1,500 copies. It was on pink vinyl. And then they did the wider reissue of it earlier this year. So, like I said, I'm surprised to see the label reissuing this album already, but if you don't have a copy of it, it's a great album. I know it's mainly known for Call to Personality, which is a great track, but there's, this album has so many other great tracks other than just that one song. It's one, if you don't have a copy of it, it's definitely worth grabbing, especially for $24. It's produced by Mick Jagger, which is something that once I found that out, which was just in the last couple of years, actually, I realized that. And then once I listened to the album again, I can kind of hear a little bit of that influence on this album. Like it is a really good album. I think it's one of my favorite rock albums of the later part of the 80s. So you got that getting reissued, and then you got Cloud 9 by George Harrison getting reissued this week also. Released back in 1987. It was his 11th studio album. It's going to run you about $34 online. This is his first album in 5 years. And this is really kind of an interesting album for George because George, of course he's known as the guitarist for the Beatles, and he had a really great solo career. And this was a return to form album for him. His last couple albums came out before this, didn't really do as well commercially as he wanted it to do. And, not only, so this is the last album he would have released before he died in 2001. And this album is, I would put this up there as one of his best of his career. Got My Mind Set on You was the one big track on here, but it's another one of those albums where if you sit down and listen to it, there's 3 or 4 other tracks I think are even better than the one track it's known for. You also got the new album Soul Asylum coming out this week. This is Slowly But Surely. It's their 13th studio album. It's going to run you about $29 online. So this album, this is the band's first album working with Steve Jordan since they released In the Horse They Rode In On back in 1990. If you're not familiar with Steve, he's worked with a bunch of artists over the years. Pretty much any big artist in music he's worked with. He's also currently the drummer for the Rolling Stones. But to be completely honest, I don't think I've listened to a Soul Asylum album since the late 90s. It's been a while since they've had some mainstream success, which I know doesn't really mean anything. There's a lot of great albums that never make it into, the Billboard charts or anything like that. But, they've released a couple of singles off this album. I've heard some good buzz about it. It's definitely one I'll stream and check out this week. Then you got Sponge demoed in Detroit 1997-98 coming out. This was released on CD and digitally back in 2019. So this is the first time it's ever been available on vinyl. It's going to be on red vinyl. It's going to run you about $28 online. All these demos were recorded after the band released their sophomore album, Wax Ecstatic, which I think was the last really great album from Sponge. Their first two albums were really good because they kind of rode in on the coattails of grunge. And then after Wax Ecstatic came out, they kind of made this like poppier turn. So the band would go on to record Planet Girls, which was shelved by the label in 1999, was never released officially until Record Store Day last year. So a couple of these tracks on these demos, on this demo album, would end up on Planet Girls. But the demos were a little bit different because you can go online and stream them. But it has this like grittier, more raw sound that I think kind of plays better with those tracks. For $28, I probably still won't pick it up because I would say there's probably only, I'd say 4, maybe 5 songs on here that I probably listened to multiple times. I'll probably just end up streaming it from here on out. But, if you're a huge fan of Sponge, it might be a good one to check out this week. There's also a 20th anniversary edition of Live Like You Were Dying by Tim McGraw coming out this week. Released back in 2004, it was his 8th studio album. It's going to run you about $33 online. This is an album that I thought was supposed to be released back in August. Must have got delayed until this week, though. But I'm not the biggest country music fan, but this is an album I've long considered one of the best, if not the best, country albums of the 2000s. It sold a bunch of copies. It sold over 4 million copies, hit number one on the Billboard 200. This album really kind of, I think, solidified Tim McGraw as one of the biggest country artists of his generation. It's one I'll probably grab this week. And you also got Blackmore's Night, Fires at Midnight coming out. This was released back in 2001. It was our 3rd studio album. It's 2 LP releases. It's going to be on red and black marbled vinyl. It's going to run you about $35 online. I'm not sure why this is listed as a 25th anniversary release because it hasn't been 25 years since this album came out. It's only been 23. I know that Under a Velvet Moon came out back in 1999, which that would have been 25 years ago. But, like I said, I saw on 2 different websites listed as a 25th anniversary release, so it really kind of threw me off. If you're unfamiliar with Blackmore's Night, they were started back in the mid-90s by legendary guitarist Richie Blackmore and his wife Candace Knight. It's really kind of interesting music. It's music that's not for everyone, but it's rock mixed with like folk rock with like really strong medieval themes. It's one that if you're unfamiliar with Blackmore's Night, I definitely recommend checking them out. So the last 6 releases I got for today are the final 6 releases from the ACDC 50th series that they started last year. So for the 50th anniversary of the band, they went through and reissued, or they were going through and reissuing all the band's albums, all on gold vinyl. So like I said, you got the final 6 releases that coming out this week. The first one is Flick of the Switch. Came out back in 1983. It was their 9th studio album. It's going to run you about $30 online. So this album came out right off the heels of Back in Black and For Those About to Rock, We Salute You, which were both huge albums, but they were both produced by Mutt Lange. So this is the first album from the band that was produced by the band. And I think that's why it has it's got a different sound to it. I don't want to call it like a more raw sound, but I think the best way to describe this album is it's a straightforward rock album, but it has some really stripped down elements to it also. And I think that's mainly because, like I said, they broke away from Mutt Lange, and I think that's why there's such a stark contrast in sound between this album and those 2 albums that came out before it. But like I said, it is a really good album. It's one I haven't listened to in a really long time. I need to go back through and stream that again this week. And then the next release is Fly on the Wall. It's their 10th studio album. It's going to run you about $30 online. So this is a heavier album than Flick of the Switch. And I think it's mainly because it was just Malcolm and Angus that produced this album, so I think that's why it has a little bit of a different sound. But it's one I hadn't listened to in a really long time until someone posted a copy of this album that they had in the Vinyl Den Facebook group, probably within the last month or so. And that was the first time I'd listened to this album in 20 plus years. I was never a big fan of this one, but yeah, I think I've softened up on it a little bit since the last time I listened to it. There's a couple of tracks on here. If I was putting together an ACDC playlist, I'd probably add a couple of tracks on there. But so I kind of see why it's become a fan favorite over the years, because maybe it's grown on a lot of other people also. But it's the second release of the 6 are coming out this week. Then the third release got to come out from ACDC this week is Blow Up Your Video. Came out back in 1988. It was their 11th studio album. It's also going to run you about $30 online. So going back and listen to this album, this is another album I hadn't listened to in a really long time. I would say the energy on this album is very reminiscent of the energy on those early Bon Scott albums. And I think, and I don't want to call it a return to form album because they were releasing good music or good albums before this one. I think, commercially Fly on the Wall did not do well. And I think that's kind of why it's a little bit of a return to form album. This definitely sparked the whole mainstream interest in ACDC in the later part of the 80s. I think like the second half of their career kind of kicked off from that point. So that's coming out. And then the next release is Black Ice. Came out back in 2008. It was our 15th studio album. This is a 2 LP release. It's going to run you about $40 online. This is the band's first album in 8 years. This is also the band's last album with Malcolm Young. Of course, would die in 2017. It took a really long time to record this album. They started this album back, I think it was like 2003 or 2004. I read that they started working on these songs, but there was some health issues, there were some injuries, they changed labels. There's a lot of delays that caused this album to really kind of get pushed back, but it's one of the band's biggest selling albums of the 21st century. The 5th release is Power Up. This came out back in 2020. It was their 17th studio album. It's going to run you about $35 online. This is an album that when I first listened to it, so in 2020 when this album came out, I hadn't listened to anything from AC/DC other than like Highway to Hell and Back in Black in probably 15 years. And I didn't really know what to expect with this album. And then when I finally sat down and listened to it, I was actually really impressed with this album. It wasn't one of my favorite albums of 2020. It was for a lot of people, and I understand why. But this is an album this is a tribute to Malcolm. So this is all tracks that Malcolm had been working on with Angus over the years. All the tracks on this album were all unused stuff from the 2. And, it's kind of a cool little twist on the album. I definitely put this up there with Black Ice as 2 of the band's best albums from the 21st century. Then the last one was Live at Rare Plate, released back in 2012 as a live album. This is recorded during the Black Ice tour back in 2009. And this is actually the second of 3 shows in, I think it was December. Yeah, December 2009. This is a River Plate Stadium in Argentina in front of a huge crowd. I think it was over 60,000+ people there that night. And they played all the big tracks that you would think AC/DC would play. And I think it's really kind of showcased the energy that comes from an AC/DC show, even later in their career, how well they were still performing live. Well, that's all I got for today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Like I said, a lot of really great stuff coming out this week. I'm definitely going to grab the Alice in Chains. I got 3 or 4 I got other question marks by. I might grab a couple of those AC/DC releases. We'll see what I end up grabbing, but let me know what you guys are looking forward to. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me the thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all I got. Until next time, keep all spinning. Peace.